All right. Hello, everyone. So today, Maddie and I are presenting on the History as Scholarship paper presentation. And our topic is Women in STEM, specifically at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
So just going over what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to go into why did we choose women in STEM, particularly at MIT, a brief overview of the history of the institution and the women that come with it, along with time periods and important events and discoveries that happened, and then diving into what methodologies and resources we were using. Then we will analyze that, and then we have a few closing remarks on our general research that we conducted. So why did we choose women in STEM at MIT? Um, from personal backgrounds, Allie works at MIT, and I come from a STEM and science full um, education. So we thought, why not combine the two? And we thought there was just a lack of representation within research, particularly publishing and within media, especially if you look into all the medical sciences today with everything going on. If you see a interview of a doctor, it's usually a male doctor instead of a female. And we just think from when MIT was founded until present day that the female voices were very invisible to society and the culture around MIT. Um, so historically, women in STEM often go unnoticed throughout history, and we just wanted to analyze the experiences of women in STEM, particularly during the rise of MIT.
And those pictures too are also some of the women at MIT that kind of made a really big difference. So we just wanted to highlight them in this as well. So a brief overview of MIT, and just like bouncing off of what Maddie said in the slide prior, we chose MIT because of the accessibility. Before COVID-19, we were going to have accessibility to a lot of the MIT archives, since I do work there. And I kind of noticed the culture of MIT. It is definitely women dominated nowadays, at least within my perspective. My office is very women dominated. A lot of women dominate the student organizations I work with, presidents, committee heads, co-chairs, all of that fun stuff. So a little bit more about the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was founded in 1861 in Boston, Massachusetts, then moved to Cambridge in 1916, and was founded during the Industrial Revolution and Civil War. Their MIT motto is Mens et Manus, which is mind and hand to signify the collaboration of academic knowledge and practical purpose. The student handbook is actually called Mind and Handbook now, so that's kind of something that the students follow. It is a private research-based institution. And a little bit about the breakdown of the students. There are currently 11,520 total students as of the class of 2023. So that was just the incoming class this year. And there are 4,530 undergraduate students, 47% being women, and there are 6,990 graduate students and 36% being women. And I just want to highlight as well that the website actually doesn't delve into intersecting identities. They do highlight minorities, but they don't highlight whether they are women that are part of minority communities, etc.
So now we're going to dive into the different time periods that we had. So this first one, we went 1871 to 1900. So in 1871, Ellen Henrietta Swallow, who is later referred to as Ellen Swallow Richards, is the first female student to be admitted into MIT, not just for her first bachelor's degree, but this is actually her second degree. This falls in chemistry. And then in 1873, she graduated. Moving forward in 1876, she opened the Women's Laboratory. So this lab had to be appealed to the Women's Education Association of Boston to have a particular place to teach other female students at MIT themselves. So Swallow was very adamant about having women in the STEM field, particularly in chemistry. She saw a need for a particular lab to teach just the women students, so she wanted to do everything she could to be able to do so. In 1881, Richards and Marion Talbot founded the American Association of University Women, and they did this to help other women break barriers into the STEM field, not only to attend different institutions, but also to graduate, and they wanted to create a network of alumni as well to help women who were already in the field be able to accomplish the goals that they had made themselves. In 1882, this is when MIT started to allow women to be admitted into all departments. So when Miss Swallow was admitted, she was admitted as a special student, and she was the only one. And the Board of Trustees actually had to vote to admit her and vote to allow her to take her final exams to be actually awarded the degree. In 1884, she was appointed the instructor of sanitary chemistry. She was technically a TA under a different professor who was a male. And this was for a one-year contract at $600 for the full year, but then it was later increased to a $1,000 stipend. In her entire teaching career, starting at 1884, it was listed as a trial. So if it wasn't successful after that first year, they were going to not only cut the program, but cut her as well. And then in 1890, Sophia Gregoria Iden was the first woman to achieve the Bachelor of Science of Architecture degree. She was also the first Latina student known to be at MIT. And also in 1890, the first club for women was founded. In 1891, the first person to earn a degree in geology happened, and this actually happened to be a woman, and her name was Dixie Lee Bryant, which was pretty cool to be the first person instead of just the first woman. In 1898, the first professional licensed woman architect was able to start her career, and then in 1899, the MIT Women's Association was founded. And then moving forward, we're not necessarily going to hit on all of these dates, but just the few important ones. So in 1904, Catherine Dexter McCormick earned her Bachelor in Science in Biology. What was most important about this was she was able to promote women's rights through suffrage and the reproductive rights. So she personally funded research for the birth control pill and the sciences behind that. Jumping into 1931, Florence Stiles, who was the class of 1922, was appointed the librarian at the Roth Library. So she was also the first ever person at MIT to be appointed for the specific responsibility of the women students. So she served as a advisor to them, as she was one of the only female faculty at the time. So female students started to kind of flock to her to ask her for advice and everything. So they built this position around her already being employed at the institution. In 1937, Margaret Hutchinson Rousseau was the first woman to earn a PhD in chemical engineering. And this specific degree allowed for the mass production of penicillin during World War II. In 1945 is when we first see housing for women students. This housing was not provided on the campus for them. It was only provided off campus and only gave 14 women access. And then a few years down the line, that also opened up only 3 more spots. In 1950, Natalie Edelman Taub graduates, and she was on the 1953 issue of New England Construction and is known for her quote of, "Why should construction be exclusively a man's field?" So this is specifically when we start seeing the shift of women wanting to be more involved and realizing that men have dominated this field. So it's kind of the time of woman empowerment and seeing that if a man can do this job, so can I. And then in 1954, they finally created an ad hoc committee for the status of women students. And the reason why this occurred was because veterans of World War II were returning, so the committee began to investigate if female students should still be admitted into the institution. And something I found interesting is the chancellor was caught saying in an informal report that women weren't as successful undergraduates, so why should we still be admitting them into the institution if they weren't deemed successful? And that went from 54 to 56. And then this is the last slide of this one, I promise. In 1957, that same chancellor stated that women are here to stay, which was a little contradictory to what he said just a few years previously. But then he found from the research that they did on the alumni that there was a lot more success in women alumni at the time. And he wanted to amplify the experience with new facilities for women and as quickly as they possibly could. During this time, they also gained housing for 33 more women. In 1958, the Mitwa Academic Awards, so the MIT Women's Association, began recognizing the women's academic achievement and academic excellence. In 1963, the first women's dorm opened on the Cambridge campus. So this is the first time that there was housing for women on campus compared to off campus down the road. In 1964, the American Women in Science and Engineering Symposium began at MIT. And this was for women from over 200 universities were gathering to learn from distinguished female scientists, so not necessarily learning from their male peers, but they made sure that every presenter was a female who had thorough research behind her. In 1965, Emily Wick was appointed the Associate Dean of Student Affairs, so she was the first female to hold this position, but Emily Wick herself was also the first full-time female faculty and also became the first woman tenured professor at MIT as well. And then the final fact that I think is most important on this slide was in 1968, the first Black woman graduates with her bachelor's degree. And this was Shirley Jackson. And her story was during the time is when Sputnik was launched into space. So her schools immediately began enhancing math and science. And from there, she found a calling for it. She graduated as valedictorian from her high school and then was able to be admitted into MIT to continue this. During this time, it was also the first female undergraduate class president. Yeah.
All right. So moving forward into the time period of 1972 to 2000, kind of as Maddie said before, I'm not going to dive into every single one of these time periods, but I am going to highlight some of the important ones. So in February of 1972, the ad hoc committee created by Professor Dresselhaus and Paula Stone of 1972 about the role of women at MIT. The committee was led by two women and consists of men and women faculty and staff members to deliver a report on why support of women students is necessary at MIT. They were covering areas of admissions, housing, faculty, athletics, health, and more. They wanted to improve the environment of MIT, not just for the quality of life for women, but the quality of life for men as well. Also in July of 1972, what was happening in the world is that Title IX becomes law. So equity for all sexes and it was kind of a stepping stone for women at MIT to be able to demand more resources since it was a law federally. So in 1973, MIT, a place for women, it was developed in honor of the 100th anniversary of Ellen Swallow Richards' graduation. So this was focused on equity and inclusion of women at MIT. And they also discuss how women of MIT find being a minority in STEM at the institution challenging and interesting, while some other women also found it kind of bothersome and too challenging. But I thought that piece was interesting of how some of the women there found it challenging and interesting to be the minority. So in 1984 and 1985, it was the year of the women's. So the first woman president of the MIT Alumni Association was appointed, Mary Wagley of 1947. The first woman institute professor, Mildred Dresselhaus, who was also on the ad hoc committee, And then in 1984 as well, the first woman academic dean, Anne Friedlander, who had her PhD in 1964. And some other cool things were going on. The centennial of the alumni survey, the first Black woman in the US to earn a PhD in physics, Shirley Jackson, who graduated in 1968 as well. Lydia was one of the first Hispanic women to earn a PhD at MIT and in the country. And then also in 1993, there was the first woman MIT graduate to fly in space, Janice Voss. Yeah, moving forward. All right, so we're going to dive into some of the methodology and resources. So we want to preface this slide of we didn't want to dive too much into every single analysis that we did, but this kind of sets a stage for a lot of the analyses that we kind of conducted throughout the paper. So we kind of focused on photo analysis from Gassman's articles in chapter 7, Methods for Understanding the Past. Something I want to preface this slide with as well was a quote from that article that I kind of found really interesting, which was glimpsing a dislocated fragment of the real thing. So when looking at photos, you only really see like a fragment of the history. And there's so much more to tell in this story, but by conducting the photo analysis, you can kind of come to your own conclusion and kind of gauge a better understanding of what was really going on behind the scenes. So we apply the 5 principles and 5 frameworks that Gassman goes through within that article, which include that photographs are not just evidence, they're theoretical by nature. Meaning is not fixed or univocal, so everyone has their own perception of photos, and it depends on where you're coming from and who you are as a person. The third one is that photos cannot be separated from the caption. The captions tell the stories and they were put there for a reason. Photos are to be studied in the context of the culture in which it's circulated. So we found a lot of these photos from a timeline that the AMITA Association, so the Association of MIT Alumni, put together. And so just looking at photos from the context and the culture that this was found. And then also that photos are privileged over other expressions and mediums. So those were kind of the principles that we followed throughout the paper with a lot of different photos. We also noticed from the article, you have to ask the right questions, especially a lot of probing questions, not just to yourself, but also like looking at this photo. So the photo at the bottom left of your screen is a photo of Ellen Swallow Richards and the rest of the faculty of the chemistry department at the time. So some of the questions that we asked were, what does this photo show you? What does the information tell you? And we kind of dive into it a little bit more in the analysis slide, but then the picture to the right is also a picture of the actual laboratory of the chemistry department, and you can notice that the women are in the background as well, and there's beakers and all of that fun chemistry stuff. But yeah, we can move forward. So a bit of an analysis overview. So like I said before with the photos, you ask yourself the question, so what does the information gathered tell us? So when looking at that photo, it kind of shows you that it might have been coerced from first sight. Like it looks like a normal photo, but you can tell from the body language that a lot of the men look uncomfortable. Ellen Swallow Richards also looks stern and strong, and coming from the perspective of someone who identifies as a woman, it can kind of paint a picture of what it meant to be in the department full of men. You have to put on a brave face, you have to be strong, and that's kind of try to get out of the stereotype that men have of women, and that society has of women as well. The photo looks as if they were trying to reach a desired effect of showing that MIT supports women and representation. However, like I said before, everybody kind of looks really uncomfortable and that they're still not really representing women as you only have one woman on your faculty. And it looks like they're kind of just trying to prove a point. And as I said before too, that all of this information is assumed. And while we can do this deep dive of analysis on these photos, everyone's experiences of photographs are different. So yeah, I just wanted to pose that. And some closing remarks. So throughout the paper too, when conducting this analysis, we were trying to think of how we can kind of leverage the history that we just learned and that we researched. So understanding and analyzing history can provide us with more information on how to better support students moving forward. So not just understanding the history of MIT and like in my position as a graduate student or graduate assistant there, but just overall. And it allows us to understand the culture of institutions and how to get things accomplished. You see a lot of these women starting in like organizations and committees, and getting the men at the institution on board as well. So sometimes you have to kind of learn the ropes and try to understand what pathways you need to take in order to get things accomplished. And some implications for the future as student affairs professionals. For me personally, as a graduate assistant at MIT and returning next year, this kind of gives me a better understanding of how to support women in STEM programs. I don't come from a STEM background, so it's really hard to connect with students on that level, but it'll help. It provided me the opportunity to help guide them to appropriate support systems within the institution. So giving them this information and like better understanding the history of the institution that many students might not even be aware of, can help them feel a better sense of belonging, of being in a male dominated field in a male dominated institution. And also just in general, like applying this learning from the research that we conducted to other male dominated fields and institutions would help us immensely in being able to support our women students and women identifying students, as well as getting men on board to help support their women peers as well. And these are some of our resources. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.